Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my spoiler review for Azula in the Spirit Temple, the new Avatar comic that is now out. So obviously I did a non-spoiler review like 4 months ago at this point. I've been waiting a long time to just openly talk about this book, and let's finally get into it. I will say at the start, there'll be a lot of other places I'll be discussing this book as well. There will be an episode of the podcast where we'll be reviewing the comic and going through it page by page. My next live stream as well will also be focused on analysis of Azula from this book. So look out for them on the channel also. But yeah, let's get into it here. So just before we get into the full, like, here's what happens in the book type stuff. Again, to reiterate my general thoughts on the book. I really like the book. I think it's an incredible character exploration for Azula. There will probably be some debate about, was it the right decision in a way to kind of, in a way, not have that much progress actually happen in the book. That's, I think, what will be discussed a bit is, like, is it okay that after like 7 years of not covering Azula anymore past Smoke and Shadow, that we come back and we kind of still don't overly advance her arc all that much? I do think this is more of a criticism of the direction. Like, it's an Avatar Studios, a Dark Horse kind of overview criticism rather than specifically a critique of this book, because I think it's clear this book is doing what it can. In the current era of the comics, this is one of the better one-shot comics, and we know that the comics aren't really allowed to do those big 3-part stories anymore. So the question really is, like, okay, what are we actually doing here? What does this book kind of accomplish for Azula, and what's next for her? I think at this point, everyone realistically thinks that Azula's arc will actually be sort of properly done in one of the Avatar Studios animated projects. I think just the idea that they'll actually do the big arc for Azula within comics, it just doesn't fit in line with what the comics have been for the last couple of years. So in many ways, that's what this comic is. It feels like it's the kind of transition comic for Azula. This is the comic to separate her from some of those comic-specific elements and open the character out while opening up ideas of exploration for her character arc, so that she can now be picked up by the writers of the animated projects or whatever, and now they're relatively free to do with Azula whatever they want. We're still tackling the same ideas of Azula about, it's clear that she's on this kind of flawed path, that she doesn't exactly know what she wants, but she's stubbornly sticking to kind of what she knows. And it just seems like she's repeating a lot of the same mistakes. But the question is, when will be the kind of, in a way, the cycle when we pick it up and something actually changes? That's what we're expecting, that, like, movie maybe, if Azula is the villain in that first movie, or they maybe do another project and Azula's more the focus there. We're expecting that stuff to happen. And it all comes back to the idea of, this is just one 72-page comic. If you've read the Katara comic, the Toph comic, and the Suki comic, you sort of know what can be accomplished and kind of what can't be accomplished in just a one-shot. And I think they do a pretty solid job here, and that is, after 7 years, the need to, I think, just re-highlight a lot of the elements of Azula's character that we're actually dealing with, and just being like, she's a complicated character. It's clear there's change happening here, even if it's very slow, and this is what we are attempting to do with the character. That's what's very clear and strong, I think, about this comic, is that I think the writer, Faith Erin Hicks, knows exactly what Azula is about. That's the thing that was my main takeaway from this comic, is that I didn't just like the writing, I thought the writing was, like, really, really good for Azula. And I think you could tell a lot of care and attention went into this, because Faith Erin Hicks has been on record a couple of years ago as saying that she was almost a little bit worried, afraid almost, about writing Azula, just because of how critical certain Azula fans can be about almost any content involving the character, because certain people have very specific expectations for what should or needs to be done with the character. But I feel, based on like my own thoughts and speculations and stuff like that, I've done many discussions about Azula, this fits very much in line with how I viewed the character from the show and the comics, and I'm pretty happy with what we got here overall. Because the takeaway here is that, as from the marketing, she is given the chance at redemption. The spirit who kind of inhabits the spirit temple basically seems to have the ability to put people who have taken a wrong path back onto the right path. And so she is literally offered the chance at redemption, and all she needs to do towards the end of this comic is effectively to ask for forgiveness for what she has done wrong. And obviously, she chooses to not ask for forgiveness. She completely goes against this and say that that is for the weak, basically apologizing, asking for forgiveness is for the weak. And in essence, she has her Zuko alone moment. What does Zuko do at the end of Zuko Alone? A very strong character arc episode for him, where you think he's making all of this progress. And then at the end, when he outs himself as a firebender, the people sort of turn on him. And his reaction is to fully embrace the idea of, even though he's banished at this point, that I am the prince of the Fire Nation, the son of Fire Lord Ozai, all of this stuff. And it's just like, that's not it, Zuko. And I think Azula does something very similar here. All of this stuff laid out in front of her, like clear idea for growth. You can go in the right direction if you want to, Azula, but she chooses not to. She rejects the sort of call at this point. And I think it's the right choice. Because this is my big thing as well, is that I would have, I think, been frustrated. I think many people would have been very frustrated if this comic progressed the character too quickly. And I think just one comic was too quick, given that we had kind of a bunch of comic series kind of setting up some of this stuff. The idea that one comic alone would suddenly, resolve the whole arc was, I think, unrealistic and would have been a poor move. So this is where obviously the comic makes its choice to do the exploration, give her the chance, but have her reject it. But there are glimmers of development, both in terms of what happens like right at the end of the comic, but also in terms of little bits and pieces that Azula says kind of during the comic that are clearly there for a reason. And obviously the way to highlight that is basically, let's bookmark this comic, the start and end of it. The stuff that's basically not in the Spirit Temple. We start off with Azula and the Fire Warriors confronting Ty Lee and some guards. It's basically a trap of Ty Lee trying to capture Azula once again. They obviously get away, but they lose one of the Fire Warriors. One of the Fire Warriors is captured. And this obviously causes a rift between Azula and the other Fire Warriors, especially Zirine. They want to go back to save Chiyo, but Azula is like, no, this is a war. There are kind of casualties in war. We will not go back for her. It's not the strategic thing to do. Whereas it's clear, all of the others want to do this. And you find out at this point that they basically follow Azula because she is such a strong leader. But they're not really invested in her goal. They don't really like the idea that we're doing this kind of weird stuff where we're effectively acting as terrorists to try and force Zuko to be this version of Zuko that Azula thinks he needs to be, which is effectively to become like Azula. And you can tell that they're all a little bit like, we've been doing this for a long time. It's not been working out so well. There's not as many of us left anymore. This is not the first time something like this has happened, like that you're telling us to leave someone behind. We're not really cool with this. And she just goes full on, I'm the leader here. You will do what I say, effectively. Once again, showing that she doesn't seem to care about them necessarily. So what happens is that when they camp for the night, they wake up early and leave. And so she wakes up and she's on her own. And so immediately she is like, they have betrayed me again. People close to me have betrayed me once again. And she's furious that this has happened again. And it's just this idea, like, this keeps on happening to her. And she says, I'll hunt them down and I will make them pay. That is what she's, like, going off to do, basically. She's hoping to find them and she will make them pay. She wants revenge to a certain degree against them. But then this is where the whole Spirit Temple stuff happens in the middle of the book. And then we cut to the very end of the book. And she's obviously rejected the call from the Spirit for forgiveness, the attempt at redemption here. And so she then spots the group in where they're camping out now. It's revealed that they have got Chio back. They've managed to do a mission and get Chio back. They're all together. And it's clear that they all really care about each other here. That Zirian, in a way, has become the new kind of leader of the group. And they're all friends and happy working together here. This has been this alliance that has worked out super well for the rest of the Fire Warriors. And Azula obviously is wanting to hunt them down and make them pay. But she sees this happy moment with them all together, with Chio back, and decides to just walk away. She says, silly girls, unworthy of my leadership. I'll find new followers and a new place to rule. I always do. And that's as she just walks away on her own. Once again, it is Azula on her own, walking off to sort of find someone. Someone to rule. And it feels like it's just Azula back to normal, but that, like, nothing has been learned. But the point is, what she just walked away from is something that Azula prior to this I don't think would walk away from. She's willing to let them be. She obviously explains it to herself as, they're unworthy of my leadership. But I think you can tell that deep down, because of what is explored in the entire middle of this book, that this is a case of, I won't hurt them. I won't be terrible to them. They have their happiness in a way. I will let them be. They clearly don't want me. I'll get new people who do actually care. But the problem is that it is an Azula who is ignoring the fact that it has been pointed out to her. She knows this deep down. This keeps happening. You could say members of her family, Mei and Ty Lee, now the Fire Warriors, all of these people have basically abandoned her because of the way she treats them. And she is planning to go ahead and do the exact same thing again. And that is the kind of subtle development at the end that we sort of get here, which is that she makes this decision to not go after them and kind of in a way give up on this revenge and just decide, I'll start again. And it's like, it's the definition of sort of one step forward, one step back. But it is some progress for the character. It very similar to the whole idea of In Smoke and Shadow, when it's like, oh great, like Azula, you've regained a certain level of clarity, you realized you're not meant for the throne, but the way you're hoping to accomplish this and why you're hoping to accomplish this, those reasons are not good. And what we get also at the end is that she seems to be back on the idea of, I will reclaim the throne. So they seem to not be quite going for the idea that she super views it as being her destiny to not be on the throne. But with her, and I suppose, in a way, her being kind of like basically lying to herself almost about what she truly wants, I don't really know how much I believe the idea that like her ultimate goal truly is wanting to be on the throne. I think there is a lot of a sense from this book that she is refusing to tackle these issues at the heart of her character, and it is going to take some of those big moments. Basically what this book doesn't do, which is that she has an encounter with the real Ty Lee at the start of this book, but they don't really talk to each other really. Otherwise, she doesn't talk to actual Mei in this comic. She doesn't talk to actual Zuko, actual Ursa in this comic. So we get the internal stuff. We get sort of Azula's view on those characters. And through the spirit visions, we kind of get those characters' views on Azula. But without her actually talking to the real versions of those characters, we're never really going to see that growth actually happen. And that's why the setup for the future is obviously, I think, that we get some big event style thing, whether it be a movie, a series. Maybe they finally decide to do more 3-part comics again, and you do the big moment where it's quote unquote the final kind of time Azula is the villain. Because that's what's clear here. Azula is going to be the villain in the story the next time something kind of major happens. But I think it's clear that the setup is at some point she'll have a big confrontation with so many of these characters who are important to her, whether it be her mother, her brother. I think you could even do something with Ki, but like Mei and Ty Lee as well. Like there's a group of 5 or 6 characters for Azula who are super important for her to at some point talk to, and address some of these more kind of underlying emotional things kind of going on with her. So let's actually address what actually happens then during the spirit vision throughout the entire middle of the book, because it's super interesting. Obviously, the initial preview pages kind of showed us the whole idea here. I suppose first to explain what's actually happening here. Obviously, she walks into this kind of mysterious spirit temple that seems to appear out of nowhere. And the idea here is that this is a spirit temple. It is a place that is run effectively by a spirit. It is this spirit that seems to initially be in this light form, where it's capable of kind of transforming into this kind of human, quote-unquote, innkeeper. And the idea is if you sleep within the spirit temple, you will effectively have dreams that will show you what you kind of what you truly want. It will show you kind of like a vision of your ideal world, and it will allow you to sort of progress and change yourself from a wrong path. The idea, of course, that we get from that initial preview page vision is that Azula sees this, but then she gets the reverse side of things, which is that Mei and Ty Lee begin to talk and are like, this isn't real, right? You know how these people actually view you. And so Azula is so furious at this, she basically wakes up from the dreams before she is kind of put at peace by what they're kind of meant to accomplish, by what the spirit is meant to do. This seems to Azula's kind of anger over seeing this seems to cause the spirit to begin to go dark. And this is where it goes from being you will be shown in a way peaceful dreams that will kind of slowly nudge you onto the right path, to instead the darker side of this, which is effectively you are going to be borderline haunted by all of the people close to you, criticizing you and tearing you down for all of your flaws, which is kind of what kind of proceeds to happen at this point. It is that Azula begins to now kind of basically run the gauntlet of just encountering all of these kind of key people in her life, because the spirit's kind of gone dark and can't necessarily control what Azula is going to kind of see after this point. But let's actually address the ideal world in a way. So she kind of comes out like Ember Island, and we get that amazing single page kind of spread for the most part that has she's out there, everyone on the beach. It's Iroh, Sozin's there, Azulon is there, Ursa and Ozai seemingly a happy couple, an unscarred Zuko is there, and instead of Chan, it is Ranjan who is there. He's the other guy from the beach episode. And so this is the idea of ideal world for Azula. This is what she wants, is for her entire family to be there and to care about her and be proud of her. So Iroh saying, congratulations for conquering Ba Sing Se. Ozai saying, favorite child. Ursa saying how proud she is of her. Zuko praising her for killing the Avatar and ending the war. And then I think the reason they changed Chan to Ranjan is because for the other characters, she can't change the identity of who her family is, but it's the idea that she wants a romantic, relationship in her life. She wants a boyfriend. This is why she actually was interested in the relationship with Chan in the beach. This is part of her ideal world, as being in a romantic relationship. So obviously she changes the character who she didn't really know all that well for the other one, because Chan ran away from her when he saw who she truly was. And the idea is if she chose differently, in the same way that all the other characters are slightly different, if she chose differently, she would have a boyfriend who always is there for her and cares about her for who she is. I think that's the whole intent here, and why it's a different character here. It's just to highlight that, in a way, it's only small issues that prevented my life from being ideal in this way. And she's obviously confused by this. Like, she's kind of like, okay, this is what I want, but she's immediately on edge because this is so weird and unexpected. Like, I love how Peter Wharton portrays this kind of really confused Azula throughout all of this. And then it's immediately cut apart by the whole idea of Ty Lee and May together stepping in to be like, as if your mom would be proud of you. It's not real. Didn't you tell us she thought you were a monster? Pretty suspicious. And May says, I know the real you, Azula. None of this actually happened. This is when the spirit basically goes a little bit dark. It seems like Azula's out of the vision, but she's just actually into the out of control version of the vision, basically. And then we get what is a super, super interesting scene, probably one of my favorites in the entire book. She basically sees a flashback, and I believe even though they portray this in slightly different ways, again, showing the ideal version of this scene versus what actually happened, my take on this is that this did actually happen. It is the moment Azula firebent for the first time, and the moment basically Ursa and then Ozai discovered she was a firebender. So she seems to light a turtle duck kind of toy on fire. Ursa finds her first and is like, oh, you were firebending. Ozai pops out behind her and is like, she was firebending, and he's super happy because she's so young to be firebending, like in relative control this early. It's at such a young age. He's super excited because he sees he has his prodigy firebender who can be what he always wanted. But for Ursa, of course, she sees this as, this is the moment I lose her. This is the moment that there's so little I can do to keep her from basically being morphed by Ozai. And you can see the little bit of cruelty in a way from Ozai. He's just like, tell her how amazing she is. Tell her how proud you are, Ursa. And all she can do is kind of give the like smile. Azula is a bit confused, like, why are you not as happy as you should be in a way? And she just says, you are your father's daughter, Azula, and does her best to, stay happy given the circumstances. And it's this idea of like, Azula views this as being a happy moment for her. Ozai was really happy. And she wanted her mother to be extremely happy in this situation. And you get the cracked mirror, and the idea of how it actually was is that it's her mother looking at her with this kind of, I have to keep the smile up so I don't upset Ozai, but I am so worried for the future of my daughter. That sort of expression. Whereas Azula is looking for this super happy, I'm so proud of you, Ursa, which was never real because of the situation that Ursa was in, and the fact that the family was this kind of forced kind of together dynamic because it was an arranged marriage, and we know how like abusive Ozai actually is. And the idea that, this is what Azula wants, the kind of love from her mother that she wants versus the reality of the situation here. And you see real Azula kind of reflect back on this and be like, no, like as she sees the ideal version of it play out, wait, that's not what happened. My mother wasn't happy. My mother wasn't happy I was a firebender. She was afraid for me, afraid of me, wasn't she? And I think it's an interesting one because it's, the first one is on the money. It's like, yes, she was afraid for you because this was the moment she knew you were going to be affected by Ozai. At this early point, I don't think she was afraid of Azula, because I think we know that the whole, my mother thought it was a monster thing, is an Azula construct. Like, we have no evidence to suggest that Ursa ever called Azula a monster, because I think Ursa got what happened. She was worried, very worried about her daughter. And in a way, the fact that she was sort of strict on her and was in a way the only person in her life who sort of punished her for acting out is kind of the thing that kind of keeps her in check, gives her the kind of hope in a way at this point to even kind of in any way kind of hope to come back from this. And we get at this point, like, this she asked the spirit, you know, like, what made you think the false vision of what actually happened was what I wanted? And the spirit says, isn't your greatest desire to be loved and embraced by your family? Why can't you just accept what is offered? And she says, you know, you mean accept lies and manipulations? Then the spirit at this point, basically Dark, is like, well, if it helps you find peace, like, why not? And this is the revelation that it is actually like a spirit for the first time. It truly kind of comes out here. So it's an interesting one, because I think the spirit is sort of on the money here. Is that, like, your greatest desire is to be loved and embraced by your family? It's basically true at its core point. That is the truth. They expand on this a little bit as we go on, but, like, I think the core of it really is that. Azula does say, you know, I don't need anything from my family. They're traitors, all of them, except my father. Though she does say, but now he's a shadow of his former self, got his bending taken away. She views him as being weak now, and therefore that's her reasoning behind why she doesn't care about her father anymore. Which is going to be a contrast to what we'll see in a couple of pages' time, that she, in this point, is like, I don't view my father as being a traitor, but in a few pages' time, she'll be talking about how you needed to protect me from him. He made me like this. And it's like, which is it, Azula? Like, how much do you actually fully comprehend about kind of what happened here, and what is your overall kind of takeaway from this? Like, there's a lot of that. Here's where she sort of reiterates that, you know, she feels that the throne needs to be her. I'm the only one left with any claim to the throne. And at this point, Ty Lee walks in. And obviously this is Spirit Vision Ty Lee. It's not the real Ty Lee. Though there is some confusion, of course, because Azula was somewhat nearby fighting Ty Lee. But I think it's very clear it is not actual Ty Lee. Now, the spirit later on in the book will say that the visions don't lie to you. It's not that they're complete constructs. There's sort of a sense that this spirit is able to draw out sort of the true kind of feelings of these characters towards Azula. Even if it's maybe not exactly what actual Ty Lee would say, it knows the history of these characters through Azula enough to sort of, you know, portray these characters in the right way, is kind of the way to say it here, ultimately. So Ty Lee comes in and is just like, hey, you know, all roads lead to Azula. It's my new hobby, chasing you around, basically. And Azula just wants to fight her. And she starts to insult Ty Lee for the whole idea. Why are you wearing that dress? You know, like, you're slower because you wear it. And Ty Lee's pointing out that, like, I wear it because I joined the Kyoshi Warriors. That's what they wear. Why did you do that? Like, you were better when you were with me. And Ty Lee says, all I remember from that time was constant stress and anxiety. My aura was a mess. And Azula argues back that, no, you loved it. We were a team, you, me, and May. And then, basically, she ruined it because of Zuko. And she's very frustrated that, effectively, one of her main friendships was kind of broken apart by a boy. So she kind of blames Zuko for May kind of turning on her here. You know, the Spirit Vision Ty Lee is just like, you know, it's not healthy to be so obsessed with someone else's relationships, Azula. Maybe you should get some help. At this point, Azula kicks Ty Lee and has kind of defeated her here. And then we get, I think, a really key point. She kind of has Ty Lee where she wants her. And the Spirit is like, are you going to kill her? And Azula's response is, I think, super interesting. She's like, she's shocked and is like, why would I do that? And the Spirit's just like, I'm just trying to figure out what you want. Because in a way, like, you as the reader are, Azula herself, the Spirit, everyone is confused about, what do you truly want? You do seem like a kind of bag of contradictions. It's so messy with her about what she really truly does want. And so she wants quote unquote revenge to get one back against Ty Lee, but it's not hurting her. So what is it? And then Azula's like, Spirit, like, why do you care so much about what I want? And this is when Ursa shows up, and it's like, because I care about you, my daughter. And again, she's like, this isn't real, this isn't real. And it's just the idea of like, for now, I'm real enough. And Azula says, you ruined me. How so? You chose Zuko over me. You saved him by helping to poison Grandfather Azulon, and then you left. You abandoned me. You weren't there to protect me from Dad. So I became what he wanted, his deadly firebending weapon. I didn't have a choice. If you just let Dad kill Zuko, you could have stayed with me. You would have protected me from him. I wouldn't be this. And Ursa says, what are you, Azula? And she says, alone, betrayed. Betrayed over and over by my brother, my uncle, my friends, my acolytes. They should have been loyal to me to the very end, but they weren't. This is all your fault. And this is where we're kind of getting to the kind of root of the matter here. Of like, this is like Azula's side of things, of kind of feeling that like she didn't have her mother in her life because of this like incident that happened. Now, obviously this is the idea of like how much of the truth of Ursa's story does Azula know. She knows some of it, but obviously the whole idea of the search was that it was Ursa after the fact telling Zuko her backstory. So I think a lot of this Azula doesn't know the specifics of necessarily. So does she know that like the suggestion that like you should have just let Dad kill Zuko and protected me from him? Ursa was in no position basically within that relationship, within the royal family, to do anything to really oppose Ozai. And that's the kind of problem here within this. Now, obviously, there's a need for kind of mother and daughter to actually address the kind of issues that are present here. This is perhaps over blame from Azula, but this is the truth about kind of how she feels about this. She has issues that relate to her mother, which are ultimately very valid. But it's the idea of, why are you alone? Why are you betrayed by everyone? Why do they leave you? Why are you like this? And it's because she says they should have been loyal to me, and she blames other people. And this is where we get the idea of, like, Ursa says, oh, so what you want most in the world is for those who broke your trust, your family, your friends, your acolytes, to return and ask for your forgiveness, for them to acknowledge how they hurt you, and promise never to do so again. And it's like, is that it? And Azula's like, it's ... yes. And then someone speaks, and it's, oh please, and it's May. The captured Ty Lee has now turned into May. So May is wearing the same kind of rope that was previously used on Ty Lee. And it's like, you can't seriously believe you're the victim here, Azula. And Azula's, of course, super confused by this. Like, people changing, arriving into the scene, like, out of nowhere. Like, what's actually going on here? But that is the interesting point. Like, there's a pause, but she does say yes, as in, like, I guess that is what I actually want, is I want the people that I hurt. Like, the truth of it is that, like, okay, Azula has hurt these people. She has treated them poorly. She wants them to come back and apologize to her. That's how she views the resolution to happen here. That, like, I want a true pledging of loyalty to make amends for what you actually did. So she wants these people back. She doesn't want to hurt them. She didn't want to kill Ty Lee. That's not what she wants. She wants to have these people around, but for them to do exactly as she wants. And so now we're going to get into the idea of, like, how unreasonable that is for Azula to ask. And so she goes to kind of leave, but she kind of can't. And suddenly May is like, I've got a theory, Azula. There's something about you that makes people want to betray you. Maybe you're a terrible person who gets what she deserves. And Azula is stunned by this. Like, how dare you? But suddenly it switches to Ty Lee. I was like, who else would I be? And she's just like, I'm real. But it's just meant to confuse Azula here. But Ty Lee then says, you believe a lot of nonsense, like that we were actually friends, despite you threatening my life to force me to join your avatar hunt. And Azula says, what life? You were a nobody circus freak when I found you. Both you and May, complete losers. And Ty Lee just says, happy losers, though. I loved that circus. Azula, again, defending the point here, I gave you the chance to do something important instead of wasting your days performing for crowds of peasants. And now look at you. Once you had the ear of the Fire Nation royalty, now you're running errands for a pathetic group of fan dancers. You're less than nothing. And there's a reaction here of Ursa, the spirit kind of reacts to this, but then May picks it up again. That's what's so sad about you, Azula. You tell the people around you that they're nothing without you, that they can't survive without you. And she says, well, they can't. And then it switches to Zuko. And we're getting towards the end here. And he says, don't try to fool yourself, Azula. You surround yourself with people to manipulate and harm because you can't stand the idea of facing the world alone. Being alone would mean you'd have to deal with all the horrible things you've done, the way you've hurt the people who cared for you. And she can't really counter this immediately. She just looks at Zuko, who initially is normal, but then begins to sort of basically turn into this almost like kind of ogre, kind of demon style version of Zuko. Like the teeth start to grow. He begins to kind of transform basically into a monster. As he says, you're alone, Azula. No one to blame but yourself. Will you ask for forgiveness? And this is the big thing that the spirit has been about this whole time, is that in a way this is what the dreams were meant to do. You were meant to wake up with the idea that you kind of know what you need to do, the path to forgiveness. This more forced path that Azula has been put on here in the kind of dark spirit version of this. She's now given this opportunity. A couple pages to go in the book. Will you ask for forgiveness? And if she says yes, the idea is that this is the redemption it's on, because she's made the right choice. But of course, she generates lightning and shoots lightning directly at the Zuko monster. And it's this big kind of like no shocked reaction from all the other spirit visions. And she's like, I see through your lies, I'm finished with you. And this is when we get the reveal of the true form of the spirit. Or at least I guess this is kind of basically meant to be like the darker form of the spirit. And it's like, very well, little Fire Lord. And it's this giant kind of insect kind of spider monster, but there's actual like hands in there as well. There's a couple of different color patterns as well. It's a big change here. So all the visions kind of fade away, and we're left with just the spirit's form here. And this is where we get the explanation. My manifestations did not lie. This is a sacred place of peace and rest, should you wish for those things. This temple is a crossroads for those who have followed the wrong path. It offers a second chance to choose for the better. You, little Fire Lord, were offered redemption and forgiveness, but you rejected what we had to give you. I take many forms, and it is your cruelty and desire for vengeance that has shaped me into this, a mirror of your own inner self, a monster. And Azula responds by once again generating lightning. Redemption and apologies are for the weak. I own nothing. I'm Azula, daughter of Ozai, the Phoenix King. I am the rightful Fire Lord, and I do not take kindly to meddling spirits. And she blasts this spirit. And basically, it's revealed that the Spirit Temple was kind of like a spirit kind of manifestation to a certain degree, because when it all goes away, she is just left basically back in the middle of that forest where she kind of was initially. And she's just laughing like, nothing but spirit tricks. I knew none of it was real. Zuko would have been scared stiff. And so she puts her cloak back on, and as she walks away, the spirit, now much smaller because Azula has damaged it greatly with lightning, walks off in the background. So she hasn't like destroyed it. She hasn't forced it to change form fully just yet, but she's made it smaller and weaker. And Then she walks out into the clearing, and she spots. This is where she then spots the fire warriors down below camping out. We get the reveal that Chio is back. They've saved her. There's a friendship there. The dynamic is good between them, and she makes her decision to not seek vengeance like she was initially, to not go after these people, to not seek them and like force them to kind of ask for forgiveness of her, which was what she said yes to the spirit in terms of, is this what you want? And she avoids that. So the question kind of still comes up at the end of the book. What does she want? And I think when you come back to it, it is, she does want people around her. So the rather cutting stuff from Zuko right towards the end, and May as well. The whole idea of, you surround yourself with people to manipulate and harm because you can't stand the idea of facing the world alone. And that if you are left alone, that there's only one person left, and that's you. And you realize yourself that you are the one to blame for everything that's happened. And that deep down, the whole reason there's the whole monster thing with Azula, again, it's not because Ursa ever said that to her. It's because deep down inside, Azula does think that of herself. And that is the very kind of truthful reveal here. That's super, super fascinating, I think. That it is this reflection of her inner self, but the idea is, because she is the one who views herself that way, I think, rather than the kind of truth being that she actually is a monster. That's the very kind of fascinating kind of part of this. Her rejection here is, like I said, it's the Zuko alone rejection. It's the, I'll go back to what I know, but it's a lie. She says, Ozai the Phoenix King. He's not the Phoenix King. She's the rightful Fire Lord. She's not. And even what she says at the start, redemption and apologies are for the weak. I owe nothing. And the idea is that, like, no, you are wrong. You are objectively wrong here, Azula. Apologies are not for the weak. And this is the problem. This is the other side of Azula's problem. It's, she doesn't realize that controlling people through fear is a problem. And that's something she needs to get over to actually regain the trust of people around her, is to actually have friendships with people, not controlling them. And the other point is that her view on what strength actually is the same as Ozai's view on what strength actually is. And it is skewed entirely towards, like, power. That this quote, the reason she says this, I think, in like The Search and stuff like that, and Smoke and Shadow, is it's because it's what like Ozai says right before Aang defeats him, when he goes out of the Avatar state, and Ozai basically says, you know, like, oh, you have all the power in the world, but you're still weak. Even though, like, it was the strength of Aang, the strength to kind of have the willpower to do what he did in that final battle. That's stronger than anything. And the fact that, like, Azula is unable to see the strength of Zuko being the style of leader he's trying to be in this new era. And then the idea of that she views it as being like a weakness if she was to ever apologize for anything. Even though that's exactly what needs to happen. That's what the character, that's the next step that the character needs to take, is to kind of realize that this is going to keep happening. You are going to keep losing people until you change. And I think that's the entire takeaway from this whole book, is that they address some of the sympathy towards the character, that she is part of that tragic royal family, and the way it came about that the family kind of grew up together, that Ursa is a victim of Ozai, Zuko is a victim of Ozai, Azula is a victim of Ozai, and she basically acknowledges that in this book, even if I think she still has a little bit of a weird view on her father, probably actually bringing back into play the idea that we probably need to maybe get an Azula Ozai scene where she maybe sees him for what he truly is, and sees him as someone who did morph her into something more than she ever wanted to be. That's I think the really interesting part of this, is that we end with her wanting to go off and form a new group, lead a new, like, rule a new place. But the same thing's going to happen. She rejects people like it is as she is right now. This is what is destined to happen. She will either lose trust in people, go crazy a little bit, and banish people, or they on their own will eventually break free of that control through fear. And this is where she truly does need to have that big reunion with her mother. She needs to talk to her brother, and we need to hit some of these big points. Because I think the second she offers the idea that I will make an effort to change, people will come back to her and give her the chance. I think Zuko's already there. Her mother is already there. I think Ki, you can tell, would like to have a sister in her life. Ikem, I think, will be willing to help her as well. Then it's going to be harder for May and Ty Lee, but I do think Ty Lee will turn around before May does. And I think once May sees some of this stuff happening, that if Zuko can try again with her, if Ty Lee can try again with her, I can too. And you could see the possibility for her to actually get what I think deep down is the truth of what she wants, is to just have people. I think this is actually what the spirit says initially. The spirit's like initial guess about what she truly wants is that you actually just want the kind of like love of the people you care about. And I think that is actually it. But she views that as being weak. That is acting weak, and that comes from Ozai, because Ozai doesn't care about those things. Ozai, this is the whole point of what Ozai and Ursa, their scene at the end of Smoke and Shadow, is about. Ursa finally confronts Ozai about how weak he is, how pathetic he is, because he can't care about anyone, including the people who he was closest to, like his brother, his own family. And the fact that he has in a way put that on Azula, but you kind of think with Ozai he can't change, but with Azula she can. It is possible for Azula to change, and I definitely take that to be the takeaway from this book, because while it is quite harsh on Azula, because in a way she makes the spirit dark and it has to force her to really tackle the flaws within herself, they do have those moments where they show you the kind of vulnerabilities of the character, is that she doesn't really know how to handle a lot of what's happening here. She doesn't know how to embrace, I suppose, her true feelings about what she wants when it comes to her family. That's the kind of interesting thing. It's that, like, she obviously has this ideal view on what family in a way should be, but she needs to get to a point where she can be happy just getting the love of her family as it is now, without this idea that there needs to always be this ask for my forgiveness. I think about the only character that probably needs to happen with is Ursa. First of all, like she already got it from Noriko before the kind of memories returned, and I think they're kind of setting up that that's kind of the direction, is that if Ursa and Azula talk again, and she gets that, and Azula gets that apology from her mother, it feels like that could be enough to just open the door and make the change. And this is where it gets into the overall arc of, I do think that's probably the direction they're going in, is that they want to utilize Azula at least once more in a big villain role. I'm guessing the setup here is correct, where like she will rule a place. She will find a town and lead its people, and this will be something that Team Avatar have to deal with. And they will set it up that finally, once and for all, Azula, who's been messing around across the Fire Nation with the Fire Warriors, potentially doing a lot of other stuff in the meantime, now is the final time to address what's going on here. We defeat her as the villain, and then we actually do the character arc with her. And they address a lot of the dynamics touched upon in this comic. Because I think that in many ways that's what this is about bringing to the surface all of these ideas that these different kind of spirit visions of the people close to Azula address, the way she treats people, what she actually wants, the kind of skewed view on strength and weakness, the fact that she can't accept, like, say, like Tylee's decision to join this other group over her, the fact that she can't accept that May chose Zuko over her, stuff like that. She needs to be able to kind of move beyond. And I do think it's possible. And I definitely don't interpret this as just Azula has made her mind, she's going to be a villain for the rest of her life. There's a reason she makes the decision to not go after the Fire Warriors at the end here. And I think that's put into place for a reason. There's a reason the book ends on this note of, like, Azula going back to doing the exact same thing she's always done. I always do. I always find new people. But you shouldn't have to find new people. And these people, will they be your friends? No, she's calling them straight away her followers. And there's immediately, you don't get it. When will she get it? When will the breakthrough come? That's what we're waiting for. So, they're my spoiler thoughts on Azula and the Spirit Temple. I think it's really thought-provoking. It's going to prompt, I think, a lot of discussion about Azula's character, about where she's going. I just hope there is actually a plan post this comic. Whether there be more stuff that you need to do with Azula in the comics, or this is now the comics done with Azula, ready to be picked up by an Avatar Studios project, I'm not sure. But I hope they know what they want to do with the character. I personally love the writing of the character in this comic, and I think it's on the right path. They did the right, I think, amount of stuff with her in this comic, where they didn't overdo it and try to rush a lot of development in here in just one comic. But they've certainly set the stage quite nicely in terms of, you know, it's Azula out on her own, separated from a lot of these kind of very comic-specific elements. She's in the ideal position to be used somewhere very interestingly in the future. We just need to see what the plan is. So they're my thoughts on the comic in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are. But otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.